3, 2, 1. Thank you for joining me and thank you for being here. I'm Casey and I'm here to talk about the stories we got into last week. It's mostly about movies and TV, but I know there's a book in there this week. But even so, all stories are welcome. There's probably going to be some critiques in here, but this is supposed to be a place to talk about the things we enjoy without being a dick. So I hope everything comes off as fair and earnest. At the end of the day, I'm just reflecting on all of the awesome work that the people have put into these stories. This is just supposed to be a show about spreading love for the things we love, and I do love stories. Hopefully everybody finds something of interest here that I'm talking about and explore it for themselves. And today's Friday, yeah. Wait, and just last Friday, I released a big Dragon Ball video that we put a lot of effort into, so if anybody is into the franchise, I would absolutely recommend checking that out. Hopefully everybody enjoys that. But that's all I have in the way of introducing things. Here be everything we watched the first week of September 2024. Godzilla vs. Gigan from 1972. Finally, in our little kaiju-a-thon, we get to my personal favorite, thick, buzzsaw-chested chicken alien kaiju. Surprise of the century, but aliens have invaded. This time, they are cockroach people with a scheme to build a kaiju theme park and euthanize all the real monsters? How does that work? Is the implication that Japan is just keeping the monsters around for tourism at this point? Either way, a mangaka leads a human plot into sabotaging the aliens from the M Space Hunter Nebula. Nebulans? Their schemes from within. Gigan is my absolute favorite design for a Showa Godzilla kaiju, and a personal favorite kaiju in general. Despite this, Godzilla vs. Gigan is one of the movies I find myself flipping on maybe the most. Sometimes I find it absolutely boring and hard to get through, but this time around I was really engaged, especially with the tokusatsu action, even if the use of stock footage isn't as well incorporated as it has been in the past. Now, the original action feels particularly intense, in part because of the large amounts of blood we get, but also I think the sound design really sells it. Oh, plus Anguirus and King Ghidorah are here as well. How did I forget to mention that? Bury Your Gaze from 2024 by Chuck Tingle and narrated by Andre Santana. In 2024, do I even need to preamble who Chuck Tingle is as an author? I just in case, because his story as an author is also one of my favorites in its own right. Chuck Tingle started as a writer of what he called Tinglers. I was lucky enough to see Mr. Tingle in a signing where he described Tinglers as unintentionally rough work. Musicians can just jam and feel the music and release it as is. There's an entire industry of low-budget, independent, and unpolished films that are barely coherent and celebrated for what they do achieve with their cult audiences. So why not writing? So Tinglers are essentially stories that are unedited or proofread stories from his stream of conscious. Again, most of it is weird monster smut, but every word that goes onto the page is earnest, with some pretty fucking amazingly developed characters and stories for books with titles like Bigfoot Sommelier Butt Tasting. Bury Your Gaze is Chuck Tingle's second book that was published and edited by a major publisher, this case Tor Books. So if I was enjoying the character and story work Chuck Tingle does entirely on his own, I was ecstatic to see what he would do with a team, and I was definitely not let down by his first novel, Camp Damascus. Explaining Bury Your Gaze without crucially revealing anything, the story follows film and TV writer Misha, who broke into the industry writing horror stories with monsters of all genres, ghosts and aliens and Lovecraftian nightmares. Just as he is nominated for the biggest award in the industry, he starts seeing his creatures in reality along with everyone else. Specifically hunting Misha and his friends, the crux of the story is about figuring out how and why this is happening, because, people are actually dying from the monsters. With being a mild celebrity from all the drama of being stalked by what appear to be fans in costumes. There are a ton of themes of identity and who is the true self in this story. This is a story that takes place in contemporary Hollywood with contemporary themes. I hope it is obvious by the title, but there is also a whole lot of queer identity ingrained into the book. And not only gay characters, one of the major roles is asexual and aromantic. The character is wonderfully intelligent, witty, and feels like a very well-represented character. Above everything else, I would say his work building real and interesting characters that equally feel relatable is Chuck Tingle's real specialty and draws you into this story. I also don't read much horror. I usually watch the genre, so I don't have much to compare to it story-wise. The most effectively horrifying moments for me was a lot of the subplot around Misha's award ceremony and the media's coverage of it. Self-perception is important, but nobody wants to be in the media and seen by the world having a breakdown and being stalked. That long-running beat and the singular chapter of Sledgehammer had me, the most squirmy. And while I think I prefer Camp Damascus over Bury Your Gaze and one or two Tinglers over either, honestly. I will read the Harriet Porter Tinglers any day. I found Bury Your Gaze to be well-paced and exceptionally well-written. The audiobook has a pretty big cast, but Andre Santana takes the vast brunt of the labor. This is the first time I've heard him read. Equally, I think he's great in his craft. He's clear and he emotes well through both narration and the dialogue, which is something I definitely have trouble with. 2003's Darkness Falls. Decades ago, an old woman was falsely accused of Moira and put to death, leaving the town with a pretty wicked curse that centers around the Tooth Fairy, mostly terrorizing children as they fall asleep and doing her own little murders for revenge. I think Darkness Falls is a very straightforward ghost story that vaguely resembles A Nightmare on Elm Street with all of the anxiety of not wanting to fall asleep, just from the adult's perspective. So kind of like New Nightmare without any of the meta or the fun. I think the ghost has a fine design. I thought the story was a little paint by numbers, but written well enough and pretty coherent. I know a lot of people have a penchant for these turn-of-the-century ghost stories, and I'd love to hear from someone who is passionate about this one, but as a whole, they're not my favorite. Marvel's one-shot, A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to Thor's Hammer. I really enjoy these one-shots, this one included. It's just Agent Coulson ruining the day of a few robbers and moving on. It's short, it kicks ass, it's fun. 2012's The Avengers. What should be the cap to the first phase of the MCU. The Avengers brings everyone from the previous movies together when the big bad guy from Thor shows up with a mind control stick and an alien army to ruin Nick Fury's day. The real culmination of the first phase of the MCU did have a lot relying on it. It had to both stand on its own as a finale as well as lead into the next phase. They had to reintroduce audiences who may not have watched all the previous installments to characters and MacGuffins and story elements, while also just being fun and action-packed on its own. After 12 years, what stands out more than anything is that main cast of core Avengers plus Nick Fury. I think they bounce off of each other extremely well. So Sarah Haley Finn, the overall casting director, the MCU's first phase, should absolutely be praised for, leading all these casts and putting them together. The cast's energy turn what feels like a pretty standard script and direction and bring real energy to the picture. This does very much still have a purpose in the larger empire that Marvel has become in the box office. Marvel One-Shot, item 47 from 2012. So Coulson's right-hand man, Agent Sidwell, gets a moment to shine, hunting down a couple with confiscated alien tech from the Battle of New York from, the Avengers. With the revelations that come later, I don't entirely understand what the point of this one-shot is. While the previous two felt like either bonus material or a little pitch for Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., nothing of consequence comes from this short except for the missed potential that Sidwell could have brought to the late MCU. Godzilla x Kong: The New Empire from 2024. I still think you could take every word of dialogue and nearly every human scene and you would still have a fully functional Godzilla movie here. What do you think? The human stuff I don't even mind. The cast is fun and bounce off of each other really well. Not every character has a reason for existing in this movie, but everyone is bringing their all to the roles, especially Kylie Hoddle. I think she's great returning as the protagonist Gia. The big fun monster stuff is also big, fun, and bombastic enough and just the right mixture to make up for that stupidly cut standoff between the pyramids and the Strait of Gibraltar. 1940s Pinocchio. So the coachman from Disney's original Pinocchio has to be one of the most sinister and real Disney villains ever put to film, right? And he never gets any comeuppance, so theoretically he continued to kidnap children for years to come. Disney's Pinocchio, with 2 C's and not 2 N's, is a morality tale in 5 quick acts that simply contemplate what does it mean to be a person. Pinocchio has to prove he is worthy in order to earn the right to be a person. Lucky for him, his judicator is kind, patient, and compassionate, giving our lead plenty of opportunity to stumble and figure out his own problems and learn from what happened. Where in rounding off the edges of some fairy tales, Disney removes much of its messaging, here a lot of the cynicism being removed of the original text gives us a much kinder narrative that encourages learning and growth through exploration and patience over feeling like an aggressive dismissal against all things that are associated with leisure and joy like the original book. A lot of the techniques from Disney's previous works are also greatly expanded in the picture as well to provide a visually beautiful canvas to pair with a well-crafted narrative. My personal favorite from Disney's golden age from that perspective anyway. Doctor Who and the Daleks from 1965. So which adaptation of the Doctor's first run-in with the Daleks do you prefer? Do you prefer this movie Do you prefer the original serial? Do you prefer the novel? Do you prefer the comics? Is there a stage show? I'm sure there's a stage show. Do you prefer the stage show that may or may not exist? Here, because we want to be as legally distinct as possible, Doctor Who is played by Peter Cushing, an absolutely normal human scientist. No, really, he's just a normal human scientist who just figured out time and space distortion and travel with his granddaughters Susan and Barbara. Oh, and boyfriend Ian is there too. First thing we do with the time machine, end up on the planet Skaro in the midst of an all-or-nothing war with the titular Daleks and Doctor Who cares else. If you are a person who is more familiar with the serialized version, as it is the more widely available version at time of recording, this has all the same plot beats, just with the runtime cut down by about 2 episodes. Outside of the character changes, every change in the story I think works in the narrative's benefit. The script is still a little clunky at times, especially when working with the new character elements, but everything moves much quicker in the movie's benefit. It's not necessarily a substitution for the original serial, but it's definitely not a terrible alternative if it came down to it. Dylan's New Nightmare, an Elm Street fan film from 2023. A fan follow-up to the out-of-canon New Nightmare featuring original star Miko Hughes, with ties to the makers of the excellent Never Hike Alone Friday the 13th fan film trilogy. I mean, this is just about everything I could have hoped for, sans Robert Englund. This is a quick horror short about the titular Dylan handling his trauma from New Nightmare head-on when a legally distinct Freddy Krueger shows up to ruin everyone's day. I think Dave McCrea's Freddy Krueger is possibly the best imitation you can get to the real thing, really cementing the whole project and bouncing off of Miko Hughes to make one of the best of the many Nightmare on Elm Street fan films, and I can't recommend it enough. It's here on YouTube. Go. And yeah, that's everything we finished or watched or read last week. Rings of Power 2, Season 2 is still going on. Still very much enjoying that. Otherwise, thank you for sticking with me for the whole video. I hope everyone got to watch or read and enjoy something in their own right, and I'd love to hear what that was from you. Again, Dragon Ball came out last Friday, and then we have normal releases next week, I think. Yeah, thank you for being you again. Go out there and have a good day, please. Thank you.